Henry Ford was a violin lover and had a fantastic collection of precious violins. The question is though, was he anti-Semitic? It's an interesting question when you consider that even Hitler himself had Jewish friends. For example, Emil Morris, Edouard Milch, and even maybe Eva Braun. But often when we look at these questions of anti-Semitism, there is black and white in some cases, but in the cases we're going to consider today, there is also shades of grey. And although with some individuals from this time, it's a clear-cut black and white, with the individuals we're considering in this video, there are shades of grey. Let's consider some other examples before we move on to talk about Henry Ford and the Jewish violinist that he actually ended up helping. I want to start off with Walt Disney. There are rumours that have circulated that Walt Disney was an anti-Semite. Is that true? Let's look at some examples of things that add weight to that claim. The famous Three Little Pigs scene, in which the wolf was portrayed as a Jewish peddler, led some to believe that there was a subliminal message in there of Walt Disney being anti-Semitic. The scene was later reanimated, as it happens. In 1938, a month after the Kristallnacht, Disney personally welcomed Nazi director Leni Riefenstahl to his studios. I have sort of mixed feelings about that. Whatever you think of Leni Riefenstahl and how she helped prop up the Nazis through her films, there is no doubt that she goes down in history as one of the genius filmmakers of the 20th century. And maybe that's the angle that Disney took. Respect for fellow filmmaker. Nevertheless, some have felt that that was an indication that Disney had Nazi sympathies. Disney's association with the very anti-Semitic Motion Picture Alliance, which the CEO founded after a particularly bitter labour dispute in 1951, is another situation that people cite. Even if he wasn't personally anti-Semitic, Disney willingly, even enthusiastically embraced anti-Semites and cast his fate with them. There are also charges against Disney of the use of racial stereotypes in Disney movies from the 40s. Dumbo's Black Crows, Fantasia's Black Servant, Centauret, and The Song of the South, a movie so offensive that the Disney company will no longer let it be seen in public. I think that's a shame. These films should be available to view, just like you can go and read Mein Kampf. Why stop people seeing them? Seems a bit silly to me. There's also the fact that Walt Disney visited Nazi Germany in 1935. The fact of the matter is, though, that Walt Disney employed Jews in his company, illustrators and the like, and it was apparently hard to find any of the Jews that worked for Disney who thought that Walt was an anti-Semite. Added to that is the fact that he made several propaganda movies against the Nazis during World War II. Could it be that people like Disney maybe could have flirted with an admiration of the Nazis in their very early days, and then as their true motives became apparent and the true extent of their crimes became apparent as Hitler invaded Poland and so on, that they changed their minds, and in any case, whatever they really thought, people of high profile like Disney would have to have supported the American war effort. Certainly couldn't have been seen to be going against it in that time. Now let's move on to this old chestnut, Pope Pius XII. Was he a Jew hater, or did he help Jews? Again, it's not clearly black and white. There are grey areas to take into consideration here. First, let's think about this Reichskonkordat. The Reichskonkordat was a concordat between the Holy See and the German Reich, a treaty negotiated between the Vatican and the emergent Nazi Germany, signed on the 20th of July 1933 by Cardinal Secretary of State Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, on behalf of Pope Pius XI and Vice-Chancellor Franz von Papen, on behalf of President Paul von Hindenburg and the German government. It was ratified on the 10th of September 1933 and in fact remains in force to this day. Future Pope literally signed a treaty with the Nazis. But here it's only fair to mention the other side of the coin, that Pius XII made many efforts to help Jews during World War II. He preached against racism and war in encyclicals. He tried to obtain visas for German Jews in 1939. He intervened in diplomatic efforts to postpone or cancel deportation of Jews in several countries. He directed the Catholic Church to provide discreet assistance. Catholic institutions in Rome and across Europe rescued thousands of Jews. Papal ambassadors, nuncios, worked on behalf of Jews in countries occupied by Nazi Germany. But here's some of the criticism of Pius XII. He was criticised for not speaking out more forcefully. Some scholars accused him of complicit silence. He was criticised for not explicitly condemning Nazism, and he was criticised for only assisting baptised Jews, so Jews who had converted to Christianity, and even then only those who had been baptised for a long time. What do you think about that? You only have to watch The Godfather episode 3 to see what can happen to a pope that the establishment doesn't like. Look at this link, Pius and the Holocaust. Pope Pius and the Holocaust is quite interesting. Of course, there were many Catholic bishops and priests in the case of who we could say things were very clear-cut black. They were actively helping Nazis after the war to escape via the rat lines to South America, for example. They were Nazis and Antisemites. But equally, there are some examples of priests who were incarcerated in concentration camps for opposing Nazism. Right then, now we get on to the actual topic of this video, Henry Ford. Some have said that he too was anti-Semitic and an admirer of Hitler. I'll leave you to read the links yourself about Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh and the rise of the Third Reich. In a nutshell, that there was a paper trail proving that Ford subsidized the rise to power of Adolf Hitler, who described Ford as my inspiration. So a mutual feeling of respect between Hitler and Ford. Ford's private secretary and lifelong confidant was a German spy who channeled his employer's Jew-baiting crusades to further the cause of the Third Reich. Read the article yourself and see what you think. Anti-Semitism in America saw a change in expression and virulence when increased immigration from Europe brought millions of Jews to the US. During Ford's childhood in the latter half of the 19th century, it reached its peak during the mid-1920s, a time when Ku Klux Klan membership had reached 4 million. Prohibition restricted alcohol consumption and discriminatory immigration policies were enacted, favouring immigrants from Northern and Western Europe over other parts of the world. A close friend recalled a camping trip in 1919 during which Ford lectured a group around the campfire. He attributes all evil to Jews or to the Jewish capitalists. The Jews caused the war. The Jews caused the outbreak of thieving and robbery all over the country. The Jews caused the inefficiency of the Navy. It's like something straight out of Mein Kampf. In 1918, Ford purchased his hometown newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and not long after that began running articles called the International Jew, claiming that a vast Jewish conspiracy was infecting America. Ford also republished the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which some say was a forgery. I actually find that interesting. I don't just dismiss that document, but some would say it was a forgery designed to get the Jews in trouble. As we said, we know that Hitler was an admirer of Henry Ford. Did Hitler have a picture of Ford in his office? And indeed, did Ford actually have a bust of Hitler in his own office? See the article in the description. Now, here's where the grey area comes in, because Henry Ford is known to have helped at least one Jewish person. And here we're talking about a violinist. We know that Henry Ford was a massive fan of the violin and collector of fine instruments. he used his wealth to purchase some wonderful instruments, Stradivari instruments and Del Jesus, many of which are in the Ford Museum that you can go and see. See my video on the Ford Museum. This is where we come to Grisha Goluboff. Goluboff was a famous boy violinist during the 20s and 30s. His parents were Russians who emigrated in the 1910s. For Grisha's upcoming 5th birthday, his father asked him what he wanted for a gift. What Grisha asked for was a violin. His father was able to locate the smallest size violin for him and found a teacher who taught Grisha all he knew in about a year. He began to perform in Europe, and eventually a German nobleman, obviously not an Antisemite at that time at least, presented him with a Guarneri del Jesus violin. But Hitler demanded that it be returned. Then Henry Ford stepped in and lent Grisha his 1703 Stradivarius. Let's have a look at a few pictures of this Stradivarius violin. Grisha's parents were both Russian Jews. Both parents came to America from Russia around 1914. Times were difficult in Russia for people of Jewish heritage. The Tsar, pogroms, prejudice, etc. Not all emigrated to America. Many stayed in Germany, and this influx from the East was a factor in the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany. The child Grisha practiced for hours each day because he wanted to. Music was his whole life from an early age. Apparently, the great violinist Ruggiero Ricci was his childhood friend. By the age of 9, he was giving concerts in Europe and other countries and all over America. And whilst in Europe was when the German nobleman presented him with the Del Jesus violin in 1932, but which Hitler later demanded to be returned. He was then given a Stradivarius by Henry Ford to play, but on Ford's death, it was recalled by Ford's son, saying that his father's collection of violins couldn't be broken up. Shortly later, he was presented with another Stradivarius by an English nobleman and used it until a few years before his death. With the advent of World War II in September 1939, concert tours of Europe were no longer feasible, and Grisha's career declined in the 1940s. As an adult in polite society, Grisha used the name of George Holcomb. While on the stage, he always used Grisha Goluboff. He married Joanne Johansson, an accomplished cellist. Their daughter Bethany, an accomplished violinist, lived in Canada and wrote her master's thesis about her father. Grisha was described as a humble, gentle person, caring for other people, and even as an adult, had a childlike innocence about him, with a youthful demeanour which stayed with him until old age. He died on April the 5th, 2002. I'll leave you the link to this PDF which you can download from the internet. So this example shows that with people that are perhaps accused of being anti-Semitic, there are some clear-cut cases where they are 100% Jew haters. We might think of Goebbels or Heydrich. But cases like this, like Henry Ford, there are perhaps some grey areas, and indeed, as the true intentions of Hitler and the Nazis became evident and America was pulled into the war, perhaps their feelings changed. Let me know what you think about this topic in the comments. Thank you for listening to this video. Ciao for now.
In association with John Crown at the piano, Grisha will play for us Schubert Ave Maria.